Healthy Archer Tips.
Crispy salmon on roasted asparagus. Very easy to execute and legitimately one of my favorites. Here I've gone with 12 spears, about 6 a plate. They're just thick enough for me to want to take a peeler to them, removing the tough exterior. As asparagus gets bigger, the outer peel gets tougher, but the inside gets more tender. At the end of the day, it's all just a preference thing. I like both thick and thin asparagus. However, if they were thinner, I'd skip this step altogether. If you don't have a decent peeler, carefully take the one you have and throw that shit in the garbage. Spend about $5 or $10 on a Y peeler, and life in the prep lane gets a lot easier. Similarly, the bottoms aren't really that tasty. They're pretty tough and fibrous. The best way to get rid of those is to bend the spears, and you'll find the natural breaking point will happen where the tough meets the tender. So I lined a baking sheet with some parchment paper, and I'm just going to hit the asparagus with a little bit of olive oil. The goal is just to coat this. Don't need to saturate it, just need a light coat on everything. And I don't do it in a bowl because the tops of the asparagus is pretty delicate, so I don't want all those little buds to break off. All right, grinding some pepper on there. And I'm going to hit it with some salt. Just a little tip here, it's good to salt from up high. It more effectively disperses the salt over whatever you're trying to season. I like to say, salt from a high makes the taste buds fly. So the salmon's been at room temperature for about 10 minutes now. It's never a good idea to take it right out of the fridge and into the hot pan, because by the time you cook it to the ideal internal temperature, you'd run the risk of overcooking the rest of it. The same applies to most other meats as well. Okay, 2 evenly sized pieces for some even cooking. If you want to get some nice brown action, some nice crispiness, you gotta get rid of that excess moisture on the outside. Best way I've found is with some paper towels. And now it's just time to season this liberally with salt and pepper. Okay, even though it seems like the salt maybe is a little bit heavy, a little heavy-handed, but at the end of the day, you can't really season the inside of the fish too much, so it actually sort of balances out. Okay, so you want to season both sides, the skin side and the fleshy side. Now, seasoning the skin side liberally also helps pull out some of the moisture out of the skin and makes it a little bit more crispy at the end of the day, which is exactly what we want. Just adding some pepper, adding to the flavor. It's with the awkward grip here, I guess I don't want any fish residue on my pepper grinder. All right, dropping these in at 400 degrees on the bottom rack. I just want a little more color to the asparagus, so I put it closer to the heating element at the bottom. All right, now we're just going to heat up this pan here. We don't really typically add the oil until the pan gets hot. Adding about a tablespoon and a half maybe of oil. Maybe went a little heavy-handed in the oil here, but I don't think it's a big deal. All right, so if we look down here, you can see when the oil is nice and hot because you can see little ripples, almost like a little shimmer to the oil, like little waves. Okay, that's when you know it's nice and up to temperature. Oh, that's the sound I like! That sizzle says the pan is nice and hot. Notice how I place the salmon in the pan away from me. If you drop it towards you, you run the risk of that oil splashing up and hooking you up with the nasty waves. So once you drop the salmon in, you're actually going to decrease the heat a little bit because you don't need to go at this high heat all the way through. We're going to drop it down so we can go for a nice slower cook along the way. Out with the asparagus. All sorts of brown action going on here. We like those brown flavors, and we're going to drop it back in there for probably another couple minutes. So you can roughly tell how done the salmon is by how far the whiteness has traveled upwards. Here, it's looking like it's about 60 to 70% of the way through, and that's a great time for a flip. That is some beautifully crispy skin. It's probably been cooking for about 8 minutes now. I'm going to always check the internal temperature as we start to get close to the end, just to get an idea. With salmon, I like to cook it to about 125, 130 internal temp, and you want to go in the thickest part, and I'm just showing you there. And I also like to touch the salmon on the sides too, so just to kind of give it that nice little cook on the sides as well. Oh, look at that nice color there. Flip that one over. These are looking gorgeous, and they're just about done right now. Okay, once that temperature hits about 125, 130, they're totally all done. It's time to start plating. I decided to start with the asparagus on the bottom and put the salmon on top, but you can do whatever you'd like, whatever you think looks best. So you may think that the asparagus looks a little bit overdone here, a little bit limp. It does, but it still tasted great. Regardless, I did adjust the times in the instructions, so you don't really have to worry about how it's looking here. If you follow my instructions, you should get slightly less limp asparagus. Dropping the salmon on in an X format, skin side up. That helps keep the skin crispy, and I think it looks a lot better than skin side down. You can squeeze a little lemon on if you want to elevate the flavor. You can make a sauce if you'd like, maybe something with yogurt, sour cream, and dill, or maybe even a pan sauce if you're familiar with how to do that. But I don't really think it's that necessary. This tasted awesome on its own, and both me and my wife really enjoyed it. I hope that you get to try this recipe out, and if you do, I'm sure you can get the same results or better than I got. Until next time.